Okay, there we go. And here comes some folks now.
Great.
Welcome, welcome, everybody.
Whoops.
As we let folks come in, if you wouldn't mind chiming in the chat, which you'll find along the bottom of your Zoom window, with your name and where you're calling in from, and maybe a little bit about yourself, what you're looking to get out of this conversation today. We're really excited to have Barbara Kurshan with us today to talk about her new book as well as her entrepreneurial journey. I'll get the conversation started in the chat there. Welcome, welcome.
Oops. I just had a welcome message to Nick. Way to
And
go, Gary.
there's Jacqueline from Marietta College. Jacqueline, great to have you. Yeah, Marietta.
Yeah. And Bobbi, one of the things I'm excited to talk to you about today is just more broadly about entrepreneurship in education. And how do we get this, more broadly? It just seems to me it's such an urgent and important thing, and yet it doesn't seem to be really grabbing hold.
Well, that's a really good place to start, since we spent about 6 months deciding how we should position education, and we wanted our book to be broader than what people traditionally think of when they think of education being higher ed or K-12. So after much research and exploration, we actually decided we were looking at purpose-driven organizations, of course, which education is a very large sector of that, but that also include healthcare, social justice, social work, community building, things like that. So the government and what people are doing, and all of those areas had the need for education of some kind. All of us are always educating, no matter what field we're in. So that's why the subtitle of the book is Why Purpose-Driven Entrepreneurial Women Rise to the Top. So
yeah, I love
great.
that. I love that. And it's interesting, Bobbi. I guess we're just going to roll here because we're into it.
If I can just
Go ahead,
real
Nick.
quick interject, if you have questions, folks, for Bobbi or Gary, or about the conversation we're having in general, feel free to drop those in the chat or the Q&A. I'll pop in periodically to read those out to the host. So without further ado, keep this conversation going, guys.
Yeah, good. But it's just, the one question I have, Bobbi, is, sometimes people think purpose-driven and profit-driven are mutually exclusive.
That's a good one. And that's part of my journey as I've done this. But and it's a good place to start, because when I thought about what I wanted to do in my own journey as being an investment banker, being a professor, being a teacher, and actually an entrepreneur, I realized that I needed to look at this from a perspective of what is your mindset, not what is your entrepreneurial experience, because it's your mindset, and that has nothing to do with whether it's for profit or nonprofit. So in the book, we look at women from government organizations, from foundations, from entrepreneurial companies, and we look at people that are running big corporations. So it doesn't have to be profit driven. It has to be a mindset that makes you think entrepreneurially.
Yeah. And I like, Bobbi, that you're getting people to think more broadly about entrepreneurship. It's not, that's one of the things I like about your new book, is that it's not framing entrepreneurship in this binary way that either you're an entrepreneur, you're going to start a business, or you're just going to think like an employee and you're going to mindlessly just kind of follow protocols. It's like everyone needs to think this way.
Right, exactly. That's probably the part of it that's been most fun in talking to the women in the book. But this book is based on research. It's not just stories. And I think that in the genre of Adam Grant or Malcolm Gladwell, I wanted to tell these stories, but I wanted to interweave the research in it. And as coming from an academic background, I had written, lots of academic articles and academic books to teach and things like that. But I wanted to do a book that was more of a storytelling book that told stories, but I wanted people to understand the research behind the stories. And that's where the journey started for me when I got to the University of Pennsylvania to set up our master's program in education entrepreneurship. I really wanted to know if you could even teach entrepreneurship. And I know, Gary, you and I have had lots of conversations about this. And I don't know the answer to that, but I do know as we've evolved our program, we began to look at the entrepreneurial mindset of skills and traits that we were teaching and not entrepreneurship skills. Everybody can take a course on how to write a business plan or how to do a financial model. What they need to understand is what is their mindset for doing this. And not everybody has the mindset to be an entrepreneur to start a business, but they can have an entrepreneurial mindset to change within an organization or to change or to build an organization.
100%. You know, I was startled to find something in, I was reading some obscure writings from Karl Marx, and I don't want you to get the wrong impression. I'm not a Marxist. But like Marx actually wrote about this. Like, what if we could exchange like human beings, where we could create things that represent a manifestation of who we are, and then we would get to see the benefit. And what Marx was saying is that the desire to fulfill human needs through our own effort is an essential part of what makes us human. And in that sense, I think it's in all of us at some level. Like, maybe we're not all cut out to be Elon Musk's.
I'm not sure we all want to be, but yes.
Well, that's another story. But yeah. But so Bobbi, let me back you up and ask you, like, how did you get on this entrepreneurial trajectory?
Well,
I mean,
I've always been entrepreneurial in my own journey story. And I went to graduate school and studied computer science and then instructional design and got my doctorate. And I just assumed I'd go on and be an academic, be in the university. And I did stay in the university for 11 years. I was at Virginia Tech and then at Hollins College. And when I was getting ready to leave Hollins, the president said to me, Bobbi, you're just too entrepreneurial to be a university professor. And I would have never labeled myself as that. But universities tend to be what you think should be the most innovative places in the world. They're probably not. Because of the way we structure how you succeed at universities. There's a pretty strict path that doesn't let you step out of those boundaries to be successful. You have to do research, you have to write books or articles, you have to teach within the format. If you want to change something and require, I mean, even going on to online, which is where I've done most of my research in universities, that was out of the box. Professors didn't like that. So when I left the university, I thought about how can I be entrepreneurial? And I went on and designed products, ran an educational technology company, took it everywhere from startup to taking it public on the public markets in the UK, and then selling it back off the public market. So I've had a long tradition in the running entrepreneurial companies and then taking them through the financial trip and then becoming an investment banker. And then after I finished being an investment banker and running a large fund, I moved into running a nonprofit. Scott McNeely from Sun Microsystems asked me to run an open source platform to upset the cart around curriculum. And now nobody thinks anything about using an open educational resource. But at the time we were starting that, publishers were up in arms and students didn't understand how to get to it. And you had all the questions about, can you trust the community to make it better, which is what Wikipedia was built on. So I was part of sort of that generation of opening up content in schools and making them more transparent. I hope I haven't opened up a can of worms as we have that backfire in some of the states right now about books and what content we can teach and making transparent. But I do think we need to engage the community in learning, but it has to be guided with good, sound research and advice, which is why the book is research-based, not just stories.
Yeah. Well, I also like, Bobbi, that you have entrepreneurial experience. You have entrepreneurial chops of your own, but you're not writing a book that's saying, I'm an entrepreneur, therefore I know what entrepreneurship's all about.
Right. I don't.
There's nothing more annoying than that, right?
Right.
So I appreciate the fact that you went out and interviewed 29 or 30 other women leaders. But before we get into the content of the book, what inspired you to write the book?
Well, I think what inspired me is I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs over the last 20 years. And I kept hearing these wonderful stories. And the more I developed the curriculum for my master's program, I realized that having all these students stand up and make a pitch in the traditional sense of pitching to a venture capitalist or to a investor or to their board was not the way to get our students engaged in understanding what it meant to be an entrepreneur. And I had to get their journey story. I had to have them tell me what made them an entrepreneur. Where was the passion? And that's what encouraged me to write the book, because I'd read so many books on entrepreneurship and writing business plan. And by the way, I'm a big fan of many of them. It's not that I object to them, but I wanted a book that had a different approach to what entrepreneurial thinking was.
Yeah, that's interesting, Bobbi, because I kind of got in the same trajectory. 2008, I was hired by the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute to do some research. And they actually hired me to do a gap analysis on the entrepreneurship education ecosystem in North America. And I a cursory search basically revealed the idea that the way entrepreneurship is being taught in the classroom isn't really aligned with what a typical entrepreneur is actually doing. Newsflash, they're not spending a lot of time writing business plans and pitching investors.
Right.
But the point that I wanted to make, Bobbi, is that there's a lot of literature out there about the mechanical aspects, but not much about the mindset, like what's driving the mechanics. And I think that's what you're getting at.
Exactly. And that's stepping into a very difficult field because it's very subjective. We have seen the growth of many profiles, of which we used one in our book, and then we developed our own self-assessment for entrepreneurial mindset that we gave all of the authors. But I think that the reason people don't step into that, it's really easy to come up with a set of lists of how to write a good business plan or how to run a good financial model and what valuation means and what investment means. And anybody can go through those steps and find everything on Coursera or edX or books, hundreds and hundreds of books. But what is much harder to teach or to think about is your entrepreneurial mindset. How do you become an entrepreneur? And should everybody be an entrepreneur? And I asked, one of the things we asked, the questionnaires in the back of the book, but one of the questions we asked everybody we interviewed was, do you think an entrepreneur is born or made? And we got very interesting answers to that question. Most people believed it was a combination, which makes sense, and that you are probably born with entrepreneurial skills. If you become one, I can make you a better entrepreneur, but I can't make you an entrepreneur. I can't tell you that you're going to go out and start a business or you're going to create this whole new industry or you're going to create in your company something that's grandly different. You may be a good leader to do that in your organization, but you may not be the entrepreneur of that thinking.
Yeah. That's interesting, Bobbi. I think, I've sort of come to the conclusion that non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned.
Mm-hmm.
But
counterintuitive, but yes,
it's counterintuitive, right? But I also agree with you that not everybody should start. Not everyone is capable of starting a business. Not everyone wants to start a business, nor should they. Mm-hmm. But I think everyone is capable of figuring out how to make themselves more useful to more people in any situation, which is really what entrepreneurship's all about. To my way of thinking.
I think one of the things I've been observing, I must get at least one job announcement a week, if not more, from a university telling me they're starting an innovation and entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial lab. And everybody's looking for somebody to run that lab. And if you go back and think about who should run that lab, well, I call it the innovation ecosystem. And I think that whoever's running that lab and the staff there needs to come from 4 quadrants. They need to have been an entrepreneur, whether within or outside of an organization. They need to understand research. They have to have been a researcher. I don't think you can do this without understanding both the market behind this as well as the academic research. Mm-hmm. And third, they need to understand investment and funding, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to grow your organization. And fourth, you need to have understand education, either as an educator or working with experts in education. And I don't mean education just in K through 12 or higher education. I mean corporate learning and lifelong learning. And when companies come to me with a business plan, and I see that it's either this great technology person, coder, who's got this great idea and made a little bit of money in some tech company and tried to start something, and I can give you example of that have been overly funded and then go out of business because they have this vanity project that they think they know education. And the reverse is true. I get an educator or a teacher that's been using something in their classroom and now decides that they know how to build this product, so everybody should use it, and they fail. So unless you have all of those parts in these labs, you won't have a good lab. And I keep thinking about, do we train people to run these labs, or is it something that's viral, that it comes from what their own experience is?
Yeah, that's really interesting to me, Bobbi. I've got a good friend named Jim Carell. He works at a community college in Independence, Kansas, a town of about 10,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, if you're listening, here's a shout out to you. He started what they call the Fab Lab, Independence Community College. The president of the college gave him like 5,000 square foot building. It's empty. And said, we'll keep the lights on for you. You'll pay your salary. You got to go find the money to buy the equipment. You got to go out in the community and make it happen. And he wound up raising over $1 million, now built a big facility. This is this thriving thing that's changed the economics of this little town of 10,000 people. And I've thought about the same things you're thinking about, like what are the magic ingredients there? And by contrast, I've been toured college campuses that have these state-of-the-art innovation centers that are pristine. There's crickets chirping in there.
Yeah.
There's nothing happening.
We have several of them at Penn. The Innovation Center, and Wharton's built a $40 million building to look at entrepreneurship and innovation. And I suspect that nobody really has the handle yet on what that means. What do students do when they get there? And so that goes back to the journey stories. I think we learn most from modeling people that have been successful and hearing their stories.
Yeah. I mean, we could have a whole other webinar, Bobbi, just talking about, the ways in which entrepreneurship, the ethos of entrepreneurship might conflict with the ethos of formal education. Like there's a whole can of worms there we could try to pry open. I don't know if you've got anything.
I have this sort of vision that someday we're going to change in college admissions, and we're not going to ask people to write an essay, about some esoteric topic or something that, everybody went to camp and they learned X or whatever it was they did. I think we should change the admissions projects to college and the way we run universities, that students come in defining a problem that they want to solve, that there's 100%. A lot of problems in the world. And I want to go to this great place where I have access to all this expertise and all this knowledge and all these resources. And I want to create, instead of a set of 5 courses you take each semester, I wanted the person to define the problem, work with a mentor, define a team of people at the university that actually helps them over the 4 years come up with a solution to their problem. And they would use mentors at the university. They would still take classes, but the classes would be related to needing to know how to solve that problem. So want to create admissions around a project-based learning approach.
Well, I love that, Bobbi, for a number of reasons, but like I don't think folks realize the ways in which like other directed, routinized learning interferes with the development of entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills.
Oh, absolutely.
And the cognitive, I follow this cognitive psychologist named Gary Klein. He's written a number of like fascinating books. But one of the things he kept saying is that, the more rule bound, this is to your earlier point about academia, the more rule bound an organization is, less likely the people in that organization are to have insights.
Right. Exactly.
And once he kind of laid it out like that, it's like, duh.
Yeah. and they all work in their silos. And so when I started the incubator at Penn, I went to faculty members and I said, can you come and advise my entrepreneurs on what, as the expert to whatever they're doing, explain to them the research related. And most of them didn't get it. They didn't understand what they would get out of it. And I tried to explain that they would be able to be engaged in an entrepreneurial experience, and they'd be able to discuss their research with someone that was trying to solve a problem that they could apply their research to, or they were talking to them because they had a network of people. And faculty in general don't think that way. And you go to a business school like Wharton, and those faculty members get it. They get involved as advisors. They understand that they can take equity. They understand that they potentially can have an impact. And when you go to an education professor or social work professor, it's so out of their realm of what they should be doing, because they don't understand, which we say in the book multiple times, that you can do good and do well.
Right.
And they're always thinking, well, my mission as a teacher is to only do good. Or as a doctor is to do no harm. But you can probably do good, and because you're doing good, do well, which then extrapolates into doing good for more people. So the
I love that
of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I love that, Bobbi. And I think, bear with me for a second, but I think that the distinction between entrepreneur and non-entrepreneur is becoming obsolete.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So, let's take this idea from Adam Smith, from The Wealth of Nations, in which he said, we all live by exchanging. Mm-hmm. Right. We all exchange useful things with each other. And so like, it brings to mind, like, okay, so what is the useful thing that we exchange? With whom do we exchange it? And what is the mechanism by which we learn how to make ourselves useful?
Right. Well, I think COVID, and I'm sure this has happened if you go back in history and look at other pandemics or crises in the world, I think COVID has made people quite entrepreneurial. They've made it entrepreneurial in the way they think about their lifestyle, the way they think about their kids' education, the way they think about their work. And we've been entrepreneurial in going back now and asking for what makes us more engaged with our lives and with the people we work with, as well as with our families. So I think thinking about what you're exchanging and what you're helping is really an important part. And in a sense, you just define what we define an entrepreneur as. You're going to do something that has an impact, that you can scale up, and that is innovative or changes a process or changes a product or changes a service. Yeah. So that's what an entrepreneur is. And it has nothing in that says you have to make money.
Yeah.
And so,
well, yeah, right. You have to make yourself useful. I mean, call me crazy, but like, the purpose of a business isn't to make money.
Yeah.
The purpose of a business is to distribute useful things out into the world. And if you do that well,
purpose-driven. And if you look at today's young people going into the workforce and the leaders and young leaders in the workforce, they don't want to work for organizations or even their own organization that doesn't have a purpose. And it has to be a mission and a passion. And the number one attribute when we looked at some of these entrepreneurial skills and traits was passion. And so and I find today that people are leaving their jobs, the great, resignation that's going on, and is because they don't feel passionate, and they looked at their lives and they looked at COVID and they said, hey, what am I doing here that's making a difference, and why should I keep doing it? And they cut back on their need for things. I mean, even wealthy people are living simpler lives and trying to make a difference and have a purpose. So that comes out over and over again in the stories in the book.
Yeah. So tell me about the book, Bobbi. What inspired you and Kathy to write this book, and then what did you learn from it? Like, what were your big ahas that you got from it?
Well, the inspiration was clearly that I had all this research, and when I started looking at the data, I saw these trends and themes that went through it, and I engaged Kathy to work with me on the book because Kathy is a networker and had a large network of leaders and entrepreneurs in a particular space that we were interested in. And I had a large network in the investment and the venture and the entrepreneur community, and hers was more in the leadership area. So we found really what I call three interesting findings in the book, lots more, but the three that stand out the most and that I share with people is that, first of all, women, and we only looked, my data had begun to look at hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs, whether they were male or female. Then I gave the same profile to 250 of the students that came through either my incubator or the master's program or our business plan competition. So we gave this profile to about 250 people. And I began to dissect the data and saw that there was significant differences between men and women in their entrepreneurial skills. And three of them came out, and one was and the fourth thing is kind of surprising but interesting. The first thing was that women, while all entrepreneurs were risk takers along a continuum, women were absolutely scored lower on the traditional risk-taking profile, but they took more calculated risks. They were more thoughtful about their risk, and that translated into returning more to their investors. And they would return it. It might take a little longer, but they return more on the dollar than men do in ventures investment.
Yep.
The second thing that we found out was that while, again, all entrepreneurs probably have big egos, but they all have high self-confidence. And however, women, while having very high self-confidence, because they wouldn't to fight the uphill battle they have to fight, they also had many incidents in the stories about having felt like they were an imposter, that they didn't shouldn't be in the room, or that they weren't qualified for the job. A man would never think that way. And these were women that are very successful women. So it was an interesting thought, an interesting feeling. And while we couldn't decide if that was innate or that was the environment, meaning that it just is what goes on in corporations even today, you still hear, stories of women being paid less than men and women being told they shouldn't take the job. So they had this. And then the third finding was kind of interesting. We looked at the interpersonal sensitivity of the entrepreneurs, or the empathy scales. And as you would expect, women were much higher on that scale. But when we tried to discern what that translated into in the way they run their businesses, three things came out. One was they have very collaborative teams, much more collaborative than male teams, whether there's men and women, but they run more collaborative teams. The second thing was that their teams stay longer. They're much more empathetic to the needs of the team. During COVID, it came out extremely high, particularly with women leaders that would, address this issue of childcare. And even my son-in-law in the government, which was surprising, his organization in the government actually cut their workday from 6 to 8 hours and gave each person the ability during the height of the COVID for 2 hours of childcare, whether they were a male or a female. So, and because they could still work on the number of hours they needed and give them that time. And then the third thing we found out was that women fire better than men, because they look at firing people as what the person needs, not what they need. So most women will go into the person and say, this isn't the right fit. Let me help you figure out why you're not performing what we need, or why this isn't working, and let me help you go forward. So that came out time and time again. And then the fourth thing we found, which was a big surprise, was that when we gave this profile to the women, they all need to achieve, of course, is one of the attributes of an entrepreneurial mindset. They all talked about the skill that they wanted to achieve, that they had a need to achieve. But when we asked them to pick that as one of their strengths, when pick their strengths or weaknesses, they never picked that. None of the women in our book need to achieve as one of their strengths, which was kind of interesting.
Do you think, do you think that would? It's just curious. It's a complicated topic. I just don't know if somebody asked me that question, would I be embarrassed to answer honestly? Is that embarrassing to say, yes, I have this need to achieve it? Almost like admits maybe a flaw in your character if you have a need to achieve. I don't know.
Well, no, that's exactly what they said. They said, "Oh, I don't want to be bragging about it, or I don't look like I have my ego involved in it." Although when you heard their stories, they all were the ones in the women that came through families that had lots of children, and they weren't particularly they were from less than wealthy families or middle class families. I mean, we have a woman that grew up in a commune and another woman that grew up in a trailer kind of thing with lots of brothers and sisters, and she had this need to achieve. And this also translated into something else that was very funny. When we have a large chapter on mentorship, which is so important to entrepreneurs. We asked them who their mentors were, whether they were men or women, and who they were. But we also asked, between your mother and father, who did you see more as your mentor? And almost all in the book picked their mother, even if their mother had never gone to college, was a homemaker, because that mother had to keep this family together. She was entrepreneurial and figuring out how she was going to get groceries and what she was going to do and how she was going to take care of 3 or 4 or 5 kids. And that was true even from those that grew up in more wealthy homes. They still talked about their mother, even if the mother was working as their mentor between their parents. They all respected their father and often saw their father as the entrepreneur, but as the mentor, they saw their mother.
That's super interesting. You know, I bet you men would probably answer the same thing. It's mom.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's just.
I don't know. We didn't ask them the question, but it would be something to look at.
But Bobbi,
really interesting.
Do you have a sense or did you track like how many of the women you interviewed came from adverse backgrounds?
We did, and it's in the back of the book. There's a section on the demographics of what their level of education was, where they're from. Our book is very diverse. We have diversity across ethnic and the ethnicities. We have diversity among age, and we have diversity among regions of the world. We found that was very similar across the two, whether they were from a wealthy family or from a more underserved family, and had many of our several of the women we interviewed were the first to go to college in their families. They are now finding that they take care of their sisters and brothers, you know, and even if they haven't gone on to college, they've helped them survive and get, you know, careers that they can support families with. And we found that they and this was true all over the world, even in India and in Tanzania and places like that.
But do you have a sense of like what percent did most of them come from adversity? Were most of them from like, you know, I'm thinking of this book, I've forgotten the author's name, but it's called The Cradles of Eminence. And this guy looked at, I think, 400 people that had made a significant enough contribution in the 20th century that at least 2 biographies had been written about them. And he found that 75% of them reported coming from sustained childhood adversity.
I would say our book is about 50-50.
Okay.
Of where they came from. I can give you the exact number, but and also most of our this need to achieve came out that almost all of our women we interviewed had advanced degrees of some kind, law, doctorate, medical, whatever it was. And we also found that the adversity was pointed out. They tell it in their stories. You know, somebody came over as an immigrant from Sri Lanka and the struggle she came. One, as I said, her mother, she lost the father very young. The mother took her and moved to Hawaii and lived on a commune with very little money. And then when her mother died very young, she got herself, stayed on the commune for a few years because it was a place to support her, but she left very early and got herself through school and college and got her MBA. So I think it's true all over. Adversity does drive this. You have to be entrepreneurial just for survival.
Yeah. And I think adversity is also sort of a relative term. I mean, you know, it's a tricky thing to nail down.
But Bobbi didn't even think of them. I mean, even though they said, well, I grew up my family didn't have a lot of money. I wouldn't they weren't poor to the extent that they were living on the street or that they were homeless,
Right.
but they never saw their adversity as something that hindered them. They saw it as something that helped them.
Yeah. I interviewed an entrepreneur last week for my podcast in Kiev. Like he's part of a startup team right now in Kiev, like doing a startup. It's just crazy. But Bobbi, talk to us about the purpose aspect of it. Like, why is that? So that's the central theme of like the two big words in the title of your book are entrepreneurial and purpose. Can you kind of?
Yeah, I think purpose-driven right now is clearly an area that all companies are looking at. And when we were trying to get away from just calling our book education, because every time we'd present education, and they'd say, oh, it doesn't get to a broad enough audience. We're not interested in a book for higher ed people or K through 12 people.
Right.
So we came to the purpose-driven theme in looking at what is going on in the HR field, in terms of looking at how they always ask people now in HR, what's your purpose, and will you feel more comfortable or more excited about working in a company that's purpose-driven, and what do you think the purpose of this company is? So we decided that we would look at that as a way to see if purpose-driven actually influenced your entrepreneurial skills and what became your skills in looking at your self-assessment because you were purpose-driven. So clearly passion shows up very high. And need to achieve, not that they picked it as their strength, but shows up very high. And the ability to, overachieve is certainly in there. So the purpose, we looked at purpose-driven as a way to identify and drive your entrepreneurial skills.
I love that. I absolutely, Bobbi, I love that. I think, in my own research, here's what I see is that, when a human being, and this is straight out of the work of Deci and Ryan in self-determination theory, right? The basic psychological need is autonomy, competency, and relatedness. And I think of this Venn diagram, Bobbi, where like there's like things that are naturally uniquely interesting to us. And there are things that we're capable of becoming good at. And then the third sphere would be, the needs of other humans. And in the intersection of those three spheres, we become optimally engaged. We tap into intrinsic motivation, which is the most potent form of motivation. And I think that's what the purpose component speaks to.
Absolutely. And there's a question I was looking at that they asked, is entrepreneurship a transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, or interdisciplinary field? And why does it matter? I think you kind of answered that question. I look at it as an interdisciplinary field.
It has to be.
It has to be, and goes back to my innovation ecosystem of what is in the ecosystem and how do you apply the ecosystem. And that's where universities are having trouble figuring out where to put it, or we even organizations that are now starting their own investment funds, they're having trouble figuring out how to have a purpose in what they invest in. So I think interdisciplinary is always hard, having been an instructional designer, and we tell somebody that they can use this across fields, they don't know how to do that. So entrepreneurship is one of those terms and fields that should be interdisciplinary, but often is automatically put in the business school or automatically put in the corporation in their sort of what they call their special labs that you get to do if you're, their skunk works, if you're lucky enough to be able to have a day off to do that. And Google has done that since they almost started. You can apply to be in their lab, which used to be called Google Labs and now has a different name, but you could apply if you had a good idea to get one day a week to go work in this lab to do innovative things. So it is definitely an interdisciplinary thinking.
Yeah. I guess the point that, what I'm thinking of, I think like in my view, the entrepreneur unwittingly stumbles into the trifecta of motivation. And I think in so much of the literature around entrepreneurship, we tend to make what a social psychologist would call the fundamental attribution error.
Yeah.
We overemphasize the importance of the person's traits, and then we tend to ignore all the cognitive, motivational, and situational factors that are at play.
Exactly.
And that's so doggone interesting to me. But I think, to put it differently, I found this quote from Bruce Lee, and he said something about the successful warrior is nothing more than a common man with a laser focus.
Yeah. And I think I agree. One of the chapters in our book is exactly on that, is persistence. Persistence is one of those traits that made successful entrepreneurs. You have to be so focused and so passionate and so persistent. And women tend to have a very strong persistence. They're much more focused on staying on track. They tend to, whether it's good or bad, they tend to pivot slowly because of their risk taking. They're more thoughtful about it. And they also tend to be less likely to walk away. Now, maybe they should walk away sooner than they do. And but because that's always a fine line of when do you say, why this isn't working? When do I pivot? And when do I say, let's start over and do something else? But persistence is certainly something that
100%.
Show a strong attribute around.
Yeah, but to my point about the fundamental attribution here, I know Nick showing up means there's questions we have to address in a second here. But what I meant about the Bruce Lee thing is that successful warrior is nothing more than a common man with a laser focus. I think the successful entrepreneur is nothing more than a common person with a compelling goal.
Right. Exactly.
But the compelling goal acts upon us. Right? It's almost like this Newtonian thing that it's an invisible force.
Oh yeah, it's true. And it's also, along with persistence, I think one of the things we found out is that women are much better at design thinking and idea generation.
I think empathy. This is to me that's the tip of the spear for entrepreneurship. It's recognizing what other people need, and I think women, can do that. It's empathy is sort of the tip of that spear. Maybe that's a wrong analogy. I'm sorry, but
well, it also goes together with idea generation because, as I said earlier, women tend to be more collaborative, and you have to be collaborative to get good ideas within your organization. If your organization doesn't feel like you can share your ideas, they're not going to generate them if you turn them off now. So the
psychological safety.
Generation. There is a question, and it's one I love. How do we reason with college administration that wants to squeeze us in the business school? I have personal experience with that, so I will share it. When I went to Penn, I had been a university professor at the beginning of my career. I had then been an investment banker. I had been an instructional product designer, designed some of the very early children's products for Microsoft and Apple and McGraw-Hill. And then I went and ran this open source nonprofit. And then I decided, well, you know what? I want to go back to the university and change education. And I knew I should have probably gone to the business schools. They would have been more open to what I wanted to do. But I went to the School of Education. And I was lucky enough because the dean was a friend and I knew he was trying to shake up education. I said, well, then let's start this master's program in entrepreneurship and not go to the business school, not go to Wharton. We currently now have a joint program with Wharton. But when I went there, I did not go to Wharton. I wanted it out of a different school. So I went to the social work school and I went to the education school and we started this. However, the faculty was not in favor of it. It was an uphill battle to get the faculty at the Graduate School of Education to buy into an entrepreneurship program. Of course, now they all want to teach it and they're all very supportive of it. But I think you have to make a good case that it doesn't need to be just in the business school. Once we had a successful program, then of course the business school was very interested in partnering with us because their students were coming over to us to do a joint program.
I can't agree with you more. I think I just typed in the Q&A box that the business school is where entrepreneurship typically goes to die, right? And I think that what folks don't recognize, Bobbi, is that the attitudes and skills required to discover opportunities are distinct from the attitudes and skills required to exploit the opportunity. And the business school is really good at the latter.
Mm-hmm. The exploitation.
Right, but the discovery process is the interdisciplinary part of it. Mm-hmm. And if we do that right, if we get the interdisciplinary part right, the non-denominational, like the people will be beating down the doors of the business school.
Well, and that goes back to my idea of coming to any school with a problem, not a solution. So now at Penn, there's a very good program out of our design school, and there's a very good program out of the social work school at Penn that are looking at this entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking. So, and we've worked collaboratively with them over the years. The program's now 10 years old at Penn, but that's true. If I can give you a list of other schools that have been exploring this, as I'm sure you have also, but it is very interesting because I think we're now on the road to what I call incubator accelerator 3.0, because we started with these traditional programs that taught business entrepreneurship. And then we moved into those that were more model or driven or journey driven and online, and we changed them. And many of those are doing very well. And now several of the things, I was involved in a conversation this week with a group out of Geneva that's working on creating an incubator model that actually works directly with the companies and then brings companies in that community together to solve problems together. So, and to grow their company. So it's very exciting what's happening, and we're going to see a whole new change, as Gary and I had written in a recent article about what entrepreneurial education is.
Yep.
And we're very excited to see, I'm very excited to see what's going on. And I think our book could be a good reference or resource for that, because we have lots of models in that does exactly that and thinks about the journey stories.
It's just sort of an aside in one of Richard Thaler's book. I don't know if it was Nudge or his book that talks about, the unfolding of behavioral economics. Mm-hmm. But one of the things he said is that, in the realm of science, like progress marches on one funeral at a time.
Right.
That's kind of how it goes. Yeah. But Nick, are there questions you want to address in here? Comments?
Oh, there was one comment. Jacqueline's been our sole questionnaire recently, but she had an interesting comment that I wanted Bobbi's take on, because Gary, you and I and our other guests in this series have talked about this a lot in the past, but the idea of young children being much more entrepreneurial than older children. So, I had a conversation earlier today with someone talking about the concept of, well, how do we get more entrepreneurial people before they even get into college? Well, starting around, they had the idea of maybe starting around 14, but I would almost argue from day one.
The joke is you want something solved and you give it to a kindergartner and they come up with 20 great solutions.
Yes.
You give it to a graduate student and they say, well, how long does the paper be and when is it due?
Exactly.
What are the rules?
Yeah. Well, that sort of speaks to my idea that non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we've seen that, like, a toddler, a 4-year-old will ask, like, why, what if, why questions 30 or 40 times an hour.
Yeah.
And it's well documented that almost the moment they set foot in school, it stops.
Right. Like my son used to ask as a child all these why questions. And when I would answer, I don't know, he would get very frustrated. So my husband started making up answers because he didn't want a non-answer. And as he got older, he became fascinated by reference books like encyclopedias and the world records and went to this questioning. But it's interesting because when you teach young children entrepreneurial skills, and there's several really good examples of schools that from starting in kindergarten introduce entrepreneurial thinking and entrepreneurship. And there was a very successful one in LA. You probably know about the one in Chicago that was funded by Ariel Investments that gives kids in the school $10,000 at the beginning of the year to help them come up with an idea or to invest in companies in the stock market and study them and why they're successful. So there are lots of people out there trying to address this issue of schools. There's a school in Dubai started by one of our graduates alum that basically uses it in their schools to get kids to look at solving problems and coming up with good solutions. I think that one of the things I have wanted to also study, and maybe it's another book, but I think there's a crossover between the entrepreneurial mindset, design thinking, and the lean startup, which are kind of the Bibles of these fields. And I've kind of crosswalked the skills. And now when I teach my entrepreneurial mindset certificate program, I actually show the crosswalk to my students. So when I'm using a design thinking principle, like how do you brainstorm, and which is such an important, or how do you look at your stakeholder maps, which is a brainstorming activity, then there's a crosswalk between the skills that design thinking tries to teach and the skills we try to teach in entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah. And to the idea of like, how do we get more people involved in this? I gave a talk for the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation in Cape Town a few months ago. And the ecosystem is kind of the buzzword nowadays, and that word makes me a little bit uncomfortable for reasons I'm not entirely clear. But we all heard this quote from Desmond Tutu, right? At some point, we have to stop pulling people out of the river. We have to go upstream to find out like why so many are falling in. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, like, when it comes to entrepreneurship and the ecosystem building of entrepreneurship, it's not enough to just support people who have already opted in. We have to go upstream and find out why so few are actually opting in.
Well, I think that goes back to where we started on the fact that so many people come to me with solutions and not problems. So it goes back
right.
to people
100%,
find
Bobbi.
Problems and then look at what you need to do to reach those solutions. And we're not seeing that. So many entrepreneurs give me solutions, and I said, but what are we going to do with this? It doesn't solve a problem. It's nice. It's cool. It's got pretty colors, and it's got, it uses artificial intelligence, but what do I need it for?
Yeah. This is something I sort of concluded with the research I did at Cisco, that, I'm all about the mindset of trying to get to the core logic, right? Mm-hmm. And it's helpful, Bobbi, in my way of thinking, like, mindset is to a person what culture is to a group.
Right.
And so I'm thinking about entrepreneurship like I'm like an anthropologist. I'm like the Margaret Mead of entrepreneurship. I'm trying to get to the level 3, the deeply held, mostly unconscious assumptions of the entrepreneur. And to your point, I think the recipe for failure is I'm trying to solve a problem for myself. I like this. This is cool. I want to open a coffee shop because I don't want to work too hard. I don't want to drive too far. I don't want to learn too much. It's a recipe for failure. And by contrast, the recipe for success is, like you just said, find the problem first.
Well, and the most successful investors that I work with are problem driven. They aren't solution driven. They want a solution, but that's going to pivot. That's going to change in the early stage. So they want a problem. And if somebody's thinking differently about solving that problem, they love that. But I think that the other part of this whole solution, and it comes out in the book from the stories, is every one of the women we interviewed came to this with a passion to solve the problem. And what you just said, Gary, is the definition of an entrepreneur. 100%. They have to be passionate. They have to think they know the solution to a problem that they've identified, and they can clearly state that problem.
That's That's a great point, Bobbi. You just connected a lot of dots, right? That's where the passion comes from. You know, a friend of mine at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico said, you know, don't fall in love with your solution, fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve.
Exactly. Which is why I want to change college admissions. So in my next life, I'll work on that.
Yeah. You know, I think you and I talked about this, Bobbi, but just for the sake of the folks in this webinar, I worked with Tecnológico de Monterrey. I think they're number 4 or 5 in the most
they're great
universities. They're really fabulous. You know, every incoming freshman is part of their every single I mean, their whole mission for, first of all, talk about died and gone to heaven. In next life, their mission statement, I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but like every student graduates with an entrepreneurial mindset, with a humanistic outlook and a global perspective.
Yeah,
every single student. And so, you know, they thrust every student into a small group, self-selected in a small group of 2 or 3 kids. They give them 1,000 pesos and say, come back in 48 hours or 72 hours with more than 1,000 pesos. There's no more instruction than that.
I love that. Yeah, that's where we should be. And that's what young people do. I want to end with, though, reading something from the book. Is that okay?
I love it.
And it's a great quote. It was one of the people we interviewed, Lisa Hall, who runs the social impact at Apollo Investment, Apollo Management. And she said, Lisa made the decision to do well when she went to the University of Pennsylvania as a Wharton undergraduate. Following graduation, she fatefully and accidentally ended up in a credit training program at a large bank and eventually worked in the group that made loans to affordable housing developers. I hit the jackpot for a first job. Here was this work that made money, was business oriented, and served the common good because it produces affordable housing. And I had a series of jobs along the way that really did that. Without planning it, she had found work that allowed her to do well and do good, honoring the values instilled at her at a young age. So I think she encompasses exactly what we're looking, and her whole career has done that. She ran the Calvert Fund, then ran one of the largest family foundations in education division over in Amsterdam, and then came back here to work with the Apollo Management and raise their billion-dollar social impact fund. So she gets to think of the problem, and her first job drove her that way. She was solving a problem of affordable housing, and it allowed her to see that she could do well and do good.
And, you know, that's so good, Bob. It's such a great place to end, because it's like you're coming back to, like, you can do good and you can do well at the same time. And I think there's also a snowball effect that when there's a purpose-driven organization, that attracts talent.
Right.
It attracts other people who are talented and driven, and it just creates a snowball effect.
Right. But there's so many quotes like that in the book, over and over again. So I hope that people will read it. I hope that if you are from an organization that would like us to come in and do a program and share with Gary and I, sharing and talking about this as a workshop, we'd love to do that. And I think you'll find a story that resonates, many stories that resonates with wherever you are in your entrepreneurial journey. Awesome.
Bobbi, thanks so much for joining us. There's a Stephen Taylor's, what's the book's title? I joined late, sorry. InnovateHERs. Nick will maybe drop in a link to it on Amazon. Bobbi, thanks for joining us. It's a great conversation. I feel like we could go on for hours.
We certainly can. We always could, like I said, we need about 3 or 4 hours, not 1.
Yeah. We'll circle back to you in a year or so and maybe revisit the conversation. But thanks for doing this, Bobbi. Thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you found this useful. Nick will follow up and send the recording to this within the next 24 hours. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. For those of you who didn't get it at the beginning, my name is Gary Schoniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. So thanks for joining. Nick, thanks for your assistance as usual. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.